Okay, so let's see how this is gonna go. All right, so let's talk about the camera or whatever is what it is, but I'm talking about the state of the fish, the state of the Miami Marlins as they are right now. They won a game today. That makes them 11-31, I think. So I think they're a couple games above the Cleveland Spiders pace right now, which is good at least to get away from that dubious distinction. But it's just I guess I haven't been able to speak upon with my voice about what's going on with the Marlins, with the next rebuild, and I don't care what anyone says from that organization right now. It's a rebuild. This is what's going on. It's a complete tear down that's about to happen, or is in the middle of happening. Or actually, more like the beginning of happening. And this team is going to be looking a lot different going forward. And the only issue is whether it's going to work or not. Now, there's plenty of other examples, I guess, within the last decade of teams that have gone this route of complete teardown, rebuild, and then see where they are from there. And the most notable example that I think every team has wanted to do is the Houston Astros type of teardown. And the Astros, save for this season where they've started off as one of the worst teams in baseball, but I don't really see that this season for the Astros as their era, their run is over. I think I just see it more as it's just maybe like a gap year, right? Because they've put through so many deep postseason runs over the last, since 2015 is when this crew had their first playoff run, and by this crew I mean the Altuve era. So they missed 2016's playoffs. They won the quotation marks, the World Series in 2017, ALCS in 2018, World Series again, appearance in 2019, then 2020, then another World Series appearance in 2021, championship in 2022, and then last year, ALCS Game 7. And that's a lot of deep playoff runs. It's a lot of tired arms and legs and bodies for a lot of those guys. So I think the Astros really, you can say that they do deserve a bit of a gap year. And I akin it to the Golden State Warriors. Remember before 2022 when they won it all again, the Warriors, the season prior, they were one of the worst teams in the NBA. So that allowed them to get Jordan Poole and have that whole situation, but they won a championship with him, and they were able to retool for another season, and it led to a championship. So their fifth one, I believe, right? Their fifth overall in franchise, I guess the fourth in this era. So I think the Astros are not in a it's over, let's rebuild completely type of mode. I think it's more of, okay, let's have one down year. Let's get some guys rested, and let's get them a long off season for once. Get good draft position. Maybe you can draft the guy, because you can't draft picks. You can't trade picks in baseball, but you can still make picks and then trade those players if a certain team covets a certain player. So if the Astros do have a high draft pick, then I could see them flipping that choice, whoever they choose, into whatever team values that pick. And that could happen as soon as what? The MLB draft is like around the All-Star break, right? So the Astros could do that. Let's say 2025, they might be in the mix once more to try and go on a playoff run. They could make that choice and then trade with the team that was, hey, a team that might be rebuilding and say, hey, we'll send you this actual good player for that prospect. That might be highly coveted. So I can see that for the Astros. But heading back to the Marlins. So the first rebuild was the 98 rebuild. The 97 teardown was, for the most part, complete. It was completely complete by, I guess I would say 2002. And that's when the last of all those guys was gone from the roster. But really by 2000 or 1999 season, it was really 90%, 95% of those guys were gone. You only really had Cliff Floyd, and that was it. And Levon was up to 99, right? Yeah, through 99, and then 2000 he was with the Giants. So yeah, I would say that era. And of course 98 season, Marlins traded pretty much all those guys. All the guys remaining on the opening day roster were mainly some of the September call-ups for 2017, and then the guys that were actually on the playoff roster. You had Sheffield, Bonilla, Johnson, Hernandez, Heredia, Alfonseca, Cliff Floyd, who else was on? Craig Counsell, I think that I mentioned Edgar Renteria. Kurt Abbott was on the. John Cangelosi was still on the team. Greg Zahn as well. Greg Zahn. So there were still guys, but you still lost Moises Alou and Kevin Brown and Al Leiter and Tony Saunders was gone. Devon White was gone. Alex Fernandez was injured, so nobody was going to trade for him and retire with the Marlins. Who else on that playoff roster? I mean, most of the team was gone, or at least a lot of the big pieces were already gone. So it's been like Moises Alou was their RBI leader in '97. But then the Mike Piazza trade sent Bonilla, Sheffield, and Charles Johnson out to LA. Mike Piazza comes back to the Marlins, and the 98 rebuild wasn't as devastating in the long run, because Dave Dombrowski was still the Marlins general manager, and he built that 97 team. He was there since the team was founded, and so he got, for world champions, a lot of great pieces that led to the 2003 championship team. So in 98, he gets Mike Lowell in the offseason for trade from the Yankees. I forgot who he traded him for. I think Felix Heredia. Went out to the Yankees. You had Derek Lee, who came over for the Kevin Brown trade. You had the Mike Piazza trade. He sent out Sheffield, Johnson, and Bonilla. Piazza gets flipped over to New York Mets, and from the Mets, the Marlins get Preston Wilson. Now, Wilson had some good seasons with the Marlins, and he doesn't stay on the team for the 2003 season, but he was traded to the Colorado Rockies to get Juan Pierre, who factored massively on the 2003 championship team. Now, that wasn't a Dombrowski move to trade out Wilson, but getting Wilson in the first place was his move. So, and Antonio Fonseca was also was sent to the Chicago Cubs, and he was part of the package of players that one of them was a player to be named later, and then eventually ended up being Dontrelle Willis. So the Marlins got a few guys there that through the course of the 98 rebuild, sending out every single guy that was on the 97 team to get the core of the 2003 team and the extra pieces, the sparks from that team as well. It also freed up salary space to sign a guy like Pudge Rodriguez for that one. Okay, I don't know, this thing disconnected here. So yeah, I talked about the 98 rebuild, how it was a success. Then you have the 2006 rebuild. So post 2005, the Marlins stuck it out with the core of the 2003 team up through 2005. So 2005 squad was still built with a lot of championship players, prospects on the way back. So Mike Lowell and Josh Beckett most notably were traded for Hanley Ramirez and Anibal Sanchez from the Boston Red Sox. And so Hanley ends up being an MVP candidate, Silver Sluggers, batting champion, Rookie of the Year in 2006, All-Star. Like the Marlins got their guy, the face of their, as far as their offense is concerned, the franchise. So they get him back from that. Anibal Sanchez ends up having a fantastic major league career, reliable pitcher on so many fronts. Gets himself a championship in 2019 with the Washington Nationals. And you send out Castillo, you send out Alex Gonzalez, and gosh, man, Carlos Delgado, Paul LaDuca. Now, Delgado and LaDuca weren't 2003 guys, but they were still all-star players. Miguel Cabrera eventually gets traded out. I mean, that was the worst of the trades, obviously. Cabrera Willis for Andrew. Ultimately, for those players like Miguel Cabrera, future Hall of Famer, Dontrelle Willis came out the worst out of all of those players in that transaction, because Burke Badenhop was also one of those guys, right? He was just kind of a mid to pitcher, but Dontrelle just never got back that swagger that he had from when he was on the Marlins. And then you had Cameron Maybin, who ends up having a lengthy career as a bench guy, as a utility man, utility outfielder. And he eventually gets himself a championship as a role player for the 2017 Astros. And then Andrew Miller does not end up being a good starter, but is converted into a relief pitcher and becomes one of the best relief pitchers in baseball, and ends up being effective for the Boston Red Sox in the 2018 Boston Red Sox, right? So Andrew Miller ends up being a good player. Finds his niche. The Marlins were never able to make him a good starter, and they never really, I guess, attempted to say, hey, let's make him a fantastic relief pitcher. But I guess that's hard to sell fans on when you just traded away the greatest player your franchise has ever had, has ever found and signed, which was Miguel Cabrera. It's the greatest player the Marlins have ever found. He was straight up a Marlin through and through. They found him in Venezuela as a teenager until they call him up. 2003, massive in the playoff run, then becomes an all-star, and then becomes a monster in Detroit. So, but overall, I mean, the 2006, or I guess the rebuild of stemming from the 2003 team, let's just say it was over after 2007 because not a single player from the 2003 team was left after the 2007 season, but that was, I believe it was a successful rebuild because the Marlins in that time period got a lot of great players that either they drafted from beforehand or they were able to get players and trade for, and had some pretty good squads, and had the baseball's expansion of the wild card system, had they had the system that they have right now, the playoff structure, that team would have made the playoffs 2 times just based on what they already had alone. And from what I've heard from like David Sampson and like they probably would have gone for it more in that time period from 2006 through 2011 if they did have the expanded playoffs. So it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that those Marlins squads were not given their opportunity. I still blame ownership for not going for it the way they probably should have in 2009, and even to an extent 2008. I think that had they gone for a more high-priced trade, maybe if they had gone after Manny Ramirez in, I think, 2008, would have cost them Giancarlo Stanton, but might have put them over the top. And you would have had a very charismatic individual coming to Miami and Manny Ramirez, and that would have been something. And it was before his steroid issues were found out. But I think it would have been pretty cool. Would have been pretty cool. And that Marlins team was definitely a dark horse candidate because they were young and they were kind of scary good in the sense that I don't think any team would have wanted to face them in a short series, like in the division series. They would have been able to steal a couple games, just like, oh, you have Josh Johnson and Ricky Nolasco going back to back in their primes. That would have been a problem for a lot of teams. Or you had gotten, instead of Manny Ramirez, another starting pitcher to solidify that rotation that with that offense that the Marlins had. Because the Marlins had a great offense from that squad with Dan Uggla and Jorge Cantu, Hanley Ramirez, Cody Ross. And you saw it with Cody Ross because he was, 2010, sent out to San Francisco and he wins the championship with them. Was one of those big missing pieces that the Giants needed to put them over the top. So, but I still find that the 2006 rebuild was a success. Not as successful, of course, as the 98 rebuild, but I believe that was like the number 2 out of all the rebuilds so far. I think they do go in order. They do go in order. Like each rebuild is getting progressively worse, or regressively worse. I don't know how you would say that. As the years go on, because you go into now the rebuild starting in 2013. So 2012, the Marlins move into their new stadium at that time. It's no longer new anymore. They moved into what is now Lone Depot Park. They make a bunch of high-priced free agent signings. Jose Reyes, Mark Burley, Heath Bell. So they get a closer, they get an anchor shortstop, they move Hanley Ramirez over to third base, and they have TV cameras following them for this Showtime franchise special, and they are selected to be the team to open the 2012 season opening day in Miami, facing off against the defending champion Cardinals. A lot of hype, but massive disappointment. Okay, as again, problems. Heath Bell was awful, and the team struggled. Hanley Ramirez gets traded, and that was it. That was the indication that it's rebuild time. And then in the off season, it was go, boom. Mark Burley, Jose Reyes, I think John Buck, a few guys head out to Toronto. Josh Johnson also, like a bunch of guys off to Toronto. The team is rebuilding once again. Giancarlo Stanton is the anchor now, and they come up with a bunch of young players. You got Christian Yelich, Marcelo Zuna, Jose Fernandez is the anchor pitcher, highly touted, just went from single A straight to the major leagues. You had eventually JT Realmuto in 2014, and you had a core. So the Marlins were able to, and this was from a lot of drafting more than anything else. So from the trades themselves, I don't think they got much of anything to help them, which I think is one of the huge problems why the 2013 rebuild wasn't as successful, because the trades that they made from the 2012 squad, the remnants of the Hanley era, didn't come back as good as far as prospects were concerned. So the Marlins had a great core that they drafted themselves or found themselves. Marcelo Zuna, Christian Yelich, Giancarlo Stanton, JT Realmuto. But they couldn't supplement that with great trades for all those other guys, those veteran players that they sent out. They were duds. They were dud picks that as far as prospects were concerned. They couldn't draft either. They were making dud picks there. They were missing on a lot of great players that would eventually contribute to other teams. And the trades that they did make were dud trades, and they were siphoning the farm system, which was already depleted by that point. So that didn't help. And finally, the free agent signings that they made, the Marlins were not spending. They were not spending. They were being cheap. And as much as David Sampson wants to defend what they did during that era, they never spent at all. They spent 1 year, then they pulled the plug when they got scared. And the Marlins didn't spend again. I don't think they were above 20th, and I think only one time they were above the bottom 10 during the era, the Giancarlo Stanton era. And so from 2013 through 2017. So throughout that time frame, the Marlins were already handicapping themselves and making a bunch of misses on trades and draft picks that they couldn't supplement that good core players that they did have. Yelich, Stanton, Ozuna, Realmuto, and then Jose Fernandez as the anchor. It was Jose Fernandez and everybody else. That was it. Tom Kohler was kind of mid. And I struggle to think of the other guys that were on that rotation. They signed Wei Yin Chen to a big contract, and he was awful. So, once again, they did sign some guys, but they missed on all of them. Jared Saltalamacchia, trying to be no, not good either. Michael Morse, also big miss. They had like a retread of some players. Miguel Olivo came back for like a dumb stint. Juan Pierre came back to retire as a Marlin for one season in 2013. Martin Prado was on the squad, but he was already a veteran at the tail end of his career anyways. He was on the wrong side of 30. So just a lot of mid picks handicapping themselves by not spending not even towards the middle portion of the league to try and help them out, try and overpay for a few key free agents. And unfortunately, Jose Fernandez dies in 2016, and that team was like, okay, Jose died, but by that point the team was already teetering slightly below 500, and they missed their opportunity to make the big moves during that trade deadline. They missed like the Fernando Rodney trade. They missed on that as well. He wasn't that great with us, and they gave up Luis Castillo, the pitcher, that eventually became something great for the Cincinnati Reds and eventually to the Seattle Mariners. Like the Marlins just made a lot of mistakes personnel-wise, and then Jose dies. Unfortunately, there were very few high points during that era. They signed Ichiro, and great story. Him down here, self-submerged, gets 3,000 hits, and a great veteran to have. You have a future Hall of Famer, living legend for them during that time period. It was great. That's one of those, like, okay, they got Ichiro down here. But you needed more than just Ichiro. You needed more than a on the wrong side of 40 Ichiro, and then that team needs to be broken up because the team is sold to Bruce Sherman and with Derek Jeter at the helm. Yelich and Stanton, Ozuna traded out. Real Muto the next season after 2018. So the core is gone. And this last rebuild is the worst of them all. Which is weird because the Marlins have made the playoffs twice during this time period. So I guess if it's the worst, it's barely below the 2013 rebuild, and maybe you could say it was slightly above. But even then, I think I'll label it below for a few reasons. So the Marlins farm system is still awful. So the trades that you get for Stanton and Ozuna and Yelich and Real Muto, Alfaro is not a great catcher, not a great player. Not even half the player that JT Real Muto is. Eventually gets traded, and just Marlins can't replace one of the best catchers in baseball, unfortunately. Sixto Sanchez has a great pandemic season, gets injured, comes back finally this season after so many years of just being injured, and is a terrible relief pitcher now. For Christian Yelich, Isan Diaz, Monte Harrison, Lewis Brinson, not a single one is in Major League Baseball anymore. Lewis Brinson is in Japan. Isan Diaz is playing independent league baseball, and Monte Harrison is going to play college football for Arkansas. So that trade went as awful as you could get it. Giancarlo Stanton trade, you get Garrett Cooper, David Phelps. Phelps is no longer here. Cooper contributed in that 2020 season. Makes an all-star team with the Marlins, actually, during one of those seasons through various injuries to other first basemen, DHs / right fielders. After in 2022, but 2023 he's traded out to San Diego, and Garrett Cooper was all right, but not to the level of a Giancarlo Stanton, and David Phelps eventually doesn't stay with the Marlins, and the Stanton trade was also not as much of a dud, but it was, the Marlins still come out losing because Stanton is, if he stays healthy enough, will hit 500 home runs with the Yankees, and that might be enough to make, given the way that power hitters are nowadays, might be enough for him to make the Hall of Fame. And he might contribute to a Yankees championship because the Yankees are competitive. So yeah. And then finally, the only one of these trades that actually worked out for the Marlins was the Marcell Ozuna trade. Because Ozuna gets traded for Sandy Alcantara and Zach Gallen. Alcantara wins the Cy Young with the Marlins, first one in team history. One of the workhorses of baseball. Unfortunately, needed Tommy John surgery, but hopefully he'll recover from that and will be one of those workhorse pitchers that just basically has a rubber arm afterwards. And you look at him like Livan Hernandez was, like at the very least what Livan was, what Bartolo Colon was, what David Wells was. I mean, he might have to put on a few pounds, but I could see Sandy being one of those pitchers that just lasts and lasts for a long time and just eats innings. And then you have Zach Gallen, who, the Marlins do flip for Jazz Chisholm Jr. Now, Jazz makes an all-star team, actually voted the starting second baseman of the 2022 all-star team, cover of the MLB 23 The Show, and a huge personality in baseball. Unfortunately, that part of the trade might actually be the big dud of it, because Jazz probably is not long for the Marlins. I think as soon as he gets the opportunity to bolt, he will, or the Marlins will trade him out, because I can't see Jazz being part of the next era of the Marlins. I don't think the timelines are in sync for that. And then you've got Zach Gallen, who goes off to Arizona and is their anchored pitcher now, and they go to the World Series last year. But the Marlins during this last rebuild, somehow, some way, through the machinations of Kim Ng and some of Mike Hill, were able to cobble together 2 playoff runs. I want to know, run is a generous term. Let's just go with appearances. It wasn't really much of a run, maybe a crawl or maybe a slight brisk walk. But 2020, they do win a playoff series against the Cubs before getting swept by the Atlanta Braves in the division series. And And then 2023, they get swept by the Phillies in the wild card series. But I mean, last season was great. And yeah, they probably did play over their heads in a lot of ways, but you do need that. There's a few teams that works for them. If you have the right pieces, if you give them some confidence and some support. It's sometimes baseball is not just a numbers game; it's a mental game, and I think that's the issue that I have going into this next rebuild. Because as much as the Marlins farm system was depleted, Kim Ng was still able to find enough pieces from some teams that were like, look, we can't keep these guys. They're all right. A change of scenery for these guys might be good. A playoff run might be good for these guys. You get Josh Bell and Jake Berger, who end up being massive for the Marlins 2023 playoff wild card chase. Let's just go with that. And Luis Arraez is traded for Pablo Lopez from Minnesota, right? So, and he ends up being Silver Slugger, batting champion across all of Major League Baseball, starting second baseman for the All-Star team. And, you have a lot of great stories that came out of the 2023 season. Skip Shoemaker ends up being the manager of the year in his rookie season. I see that. I'm like, wow. Let's build upon this. Let's see what we can cobble together. Yes, the farm system is a bit depleted here, but let's we can get some coaches, get some new scouts. We can start building from here and see where we can go. I wasn't necessarily saying, oh, go crazy and go out to a $200 million payroll. I don't think anybody was expecting that from the Marlins for sure. But hey, a bump up of another like 10 mil or something like that. And see if you can roll the dice for a second time. And if it doesn't work, okay, fine. You guys have the trade deadline. Right? I think that's as much as Marlins fans could have asked for. But they didn't in the offseason. And they got off to a horrendous start. Pitching was already suspect because, well, Sandy Alcantara was already out. We knew that. Then Eury Perez goes out before the season even starts. And other teams would have tried to have supplemented somehow. All right, fine, we don't have any arms. The Marlins had no arms. They had to cobble together a rotation. Like A.J. Puck, they brought him in from the bullpen. He was awful at the second half of last season. Like, oh, let's make that a starter. Instead of going, there's so many guys that were cut and released from teams after spring training that you could have picked up a few arms just to stay afloat. There were some competent arms out there. You could have had them on the cheap, but the Marlins didn't want to spend even that little bit of money. And so you end up with a horrendous start to the season, and they are now 20 games below 500, 21 games below 500, I think now, and you're done. You're done, and so it was all. This next rebuild is the scariest one because it's not that the Marlins won't survive it. The Marlins are going to stay in Miami. It doesn't matter. There's so many teams that have gone through multiple decades plus of being awful. Right? Of being awful throughout Major League Baseball history. A lot of teams are just awful. Just awful. Even the context of before the division series was created, or the championship series were created. There were teams that were just awful for decades and may have had one or two winning seasons. Like, okay, they won 83 games here and there, but for the most part, awful. So it's nothing new in baseball, but this one is scary because they're trying to replicate a system that I don't think works in baseball. It works only in the anomaly that is the Tampa Bay Rays, a team that has basically a super team of scouts and analytics that from top to bottom, that puts it together, and somehow those teams stay competitive year in and year out without breaking the bank. Near the bottom of the league, always bottom 5 in payroll, and somehow, someway, always still finding ways to put together wins in playoff seasons. But the Rays system still hasn't yielded them success. Success in the totality. Because sure, you can make playoff appearances, but is it yielding any fruit from that? They don't have a championship. They don't have a World Series championship. The big prize. They've gotten close twice. They lost in 5 in 2008. They lost in 6 in 2020. They've got a handful of division titles and wild card appearances. But the Rays way hasn't yielded them a championship. They've only gone to the ALCS twice in those 2 World Series runs that they had. They were outed in the first rounds of the playoffs. The division series before that, the wild card series was invented, and now the wild card series. The Rays can't win. They can't win. They can win over the long run of a regular season, but they can't put it together in the playoffs. 2020 was an anomaly. I think 2008 was probably the one season where the Rays were kind of like every other team in the sense of a deep playoff run. Before they went full analytical, in a sense, where the manager's decisions are not being made via gut instincts, but via numbers. Like in Game 6 of the 2020 series, where Blake Snell is dealing against the Dodgers in an elimination game, and Kevin Cash goes out there and pulls them because he doesn't want Snell to face the Dodgers order for a third time. It's the 7th inning of your final game in the World Series if you don't win. And you just pulled your best pitcher who was dealing, who could have gone all of those innings if he wanted to. That was the last game he's going to pitch all season. Maybe. He probably would have volunteered himself for Game 7 if you guys had won. Because you're right there at a championship and you pulled him. So the Rays way hasn't yielded any fruit on the field as far as an ultimate championship. And off the field, nothing as well. Needle hasn't been moved for a ballpark except to build another one next to Tropicana Field. And I don't know if that'll work completely or if they'll just be content with having a 30,000 seat max, maybe 29,800 something, right? And they'll have 30,000 for standing room only. For the smallest ballpark in baseball, by a long shot, with still cheap tickets anyway, so it's not really a benefit to them. And the fans have nothing to connect to. The Rays hosted 2 playoff games last season against the Texas Rangers. They got swept, and the stadium was half empty. Not because the Rangers were beating them. It was half empty when the game started. So there's a severe disconnect with the region and that team because it's not working. The Rays making the playoffs isn't a novelty anymore. It's ho-hum, and there's nobody for that team to connect to. Because why? What's the point of the emotional investment? Why should I connect with Randy Arozarena, who had an amazing 2023 season, starting from the World Baseball Classic, a fantastic story of triumph and perseverance in just the most daunting of odds. Cuba, defects to Mexico, to his name, and makes a name for himself in Major League Baseball, and then becomes the sensation of the World Baseball Classic. A Cuban man leading the Mexicans nearly to the championship game. Just, and yeah, you know, he had a horrible thing happen where Wander Franco gets outed as a pedo, and you also like that sucked for them because he was going to be their anchor player. He was going to be their next Evan Longoria. The Rays do sign one guy, and that's it. They sign one guy that they identify as, okay, this guy's going to be great for the next decade. Let's lock him in now. But that's the only guy that they sign. And that's just one guy. You need guys. You need more than one dude. More than one dude. You need a core. I can't name you many of the players on the Rays. I know of some. I know some. I know some guys. I know Harold Ramirez because he was a former Marlin. They have that Korean guy, big boy, first baseman. But I mean, the Rays players are short-lived. They're short-lived. The 2003 Marlins, I mean, a lot of those guys were on the team for a long time, even the 97 squad. Gary Sheffield was in 93. Jeff Conine was in 93. Alex Arias had been there since 93. Okay? The Marlins drafted or signed Edgar Renteria like in 92. And he was in their system from then. In 2003 team as well. Alex Gonzalez and Mike Lowell and Luis Castillo and Derek Lee, those guys were together for a long time. Turn right on West 16th. I think pitchers are obviously, those you mix and match more because pitching is just very hard to find and lock down. But I don't think the Rays way worked outside of Tampa, and even then I don't think it's a success. Why can't the Marlins copy the Braves? Why can't they even copy the Cardinals? The Cardinals aren't doing so good right now, but you know, after like 25 years of success, or even longer than that, nearly 30 years of success for the Cardinals since '96, you're bound to reach some downtime at some point. But the Cardinals are a mid-market team, and they spend like it too. Sure, they're 100 plus years old and have a loyal fan base and everything like that. But they put together a run that I'm like, man, the Marlins could just copy that. Like it'll hurt the pocketbook of ownership for a few seasons, but if you can lock down a core of guys and have them throughout, and then build around them from there, and then people will respond. People will have something that they'll look forward to. Will want to buy the jersey with the guy's name on the back because they know he's going to be there. Like there's as I sincerely, I've said this to a lot of Marlins fans. I have a rule as to the jerseys. I give them blank, or if I do get a player, that player needs to be an all-timer for the franchise or on the championship squads. And there's not many of those guys. There's very, very few of those guys left.
Turn left on West 37th Street.
You have, and you can't even find these jerseys. You have to go on eBay for any guys from the 97 squad. The 2003 squad, they only sell like Dontrell Willis, the black practice jersey and the white home jersey from that time period. New right now, Mitchell and Ness, but it's still Fanatic, so it's still. And then you have the Andre Dawson 95 teal practice jersey that they sell for him. But I mean, he's a Hall of Famer, and he finished his career with the Marlins. So yeah, I think that's okay. You can get that too, but it is very few. There's very few, right? Giancarlo Stanton, sure, but he's not on the team anymore. Anybody that's on this roster right now for the Marlins, Sandy Alcantara, probably the only guy, just because he's the only Cy Young Award winner. Like those are like the big award winners. Batting champion, I'm not. I have a Hanley Ramirez one, but I got that on Goodwill. I have an orange Hanley Ramirez, and I got that from Goodwill. So, and it was $5. So that's the only reason I have that. And then I have a Miguel Cabrera from 2003. It's obvious why I have that one with the number 20 on it, because that was the original number he had. And then, gosh, that's really it. I don't have anything else as far as the Marlins are concerned. Yeah, that's all I have. I just have Miguel Cabrera and Hanley Ramirez, and the rest are blank. I have a blank teal practice jersey, a blank current white jersey. I have a blank alternate white jersey from 2003. I have a blank black practice jersey from like 2008 or 9, around that era. And then I have, gosh. Can't think of anything else, so I'm not sure. I'd have to look at my closet, but I don't really have much else. So, it's my concern. I'm very concerned with this next rebuild and in the direction that they're trying to go in. Now, of course, a lot of people say, well, if you could just replicate the Rays and then infuse that with actual money, it could be something. It could be. It could